The Vietnam War is remembered for many things: its dangerous foreign landscape that cut off many of the Americans' advantages, many guerrilla warfare battles, the fresh, terrifying smell of napalm in the morning, and the unforgettable songs as well. The Vietnam War started on November 1st, 1955. The U.S. took over the financial and military responsibility for South Vietnam, since the French held the previous role, and left them behind in 1954. The first U.S. combat troops actually arrived a bit later on March 8th, 1965. The fellow troops kept on coming in and joined their fellow American military advisors that were already there due to aiding the French. The war between the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese commenced. The South Vietnamese were backed by the US primarily, and some other nations as well. The North Vietnamese were backed by China and the Soviet Union, two giant communist powerhouses. The battle was over which form of government ruled Vietnam: democracy or communism. The battle continued on for years till the US withdrew all of their troops on the 29th of March 1975. The war ended the very next day on March 30th. Most of us remember the war for how it ended and its many tales of what American soldiers were doing in the jungles. Most of us don't remember who and what started the war, though. This may be surprising to most Americans, but the US started the Vietnam War. So why did the US start the Vietnam War then? First of all, the US started the war despite it being declared years later in 1964 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It started by the US taking the duty of financial and military support for South Vietnam. France held these previous responsibilities of South Vietnam. France abandoned Vietnam, however, in 1954, so the US decided to take the reins. This meant they wouldn't be just sending military advisors over anymore. This meant a full-scale part in the war. America then proceeded over the years by sending more soldiers to Vietnam. Why did they start it, though? Why didn't the US just leave the conflict in Vietnam when France did? Why did they get fully involved after France's departure? The Red Scare, the built-up fear of communism spreading across the world and taking it over. The Red Scare was created through heavy propaganda aimed towards American citizens by the government. The Red Scare started after World War II, and the USSR and China were the main inspiration of the Red Scare. The fact that these two communist countries were rising in power and influence across Asia worried American politicians. The American politicians thus created propaganda to show the American people in their eyes what was the supposed threat to them. The Red Scare spawned many conflicts such as the Cuban Missile Crisis and many others. The Vietnam War was one of the many conflicts spawned from the Red Scare. Most don't realize the fact that the US occupied Vietnam and several countries at this time out of fear of communism expanding and spreading across the world. The US also didn't want to look too weak in front of the communist nations. This is why the US has competed with them several times in this point in history. The space race is a prime example of this, along with many other conflicts during the Cold War. The US started the war to show how tough they thought they would be on communism, and due to their pre-existing fear, powerful communist nations spreading their influence. Several quotes of politicians and presidents during the Vietnam era show their position and motivations behind this war clearly. This includes the likes of John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard Nixon, along with many other soldiers, generals, and politicians at the time. Now, the motivations for the US occupying Vietnam are clear. The bigger question here is whether the US starting the war was justified. Was the involvement of the US justified or not? I'm not here to answer that question, but you should think about it on your own time.